You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, book lovers. You're going to be so happy to see who we have with us here today. We have Marie Benedict. We're thrilled that she's here to talk about her new book, The Mitford Affair. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just delighted to be here.
Well, we're super delighted that you're here too. And I want to talk a little bit about your bio because we have a lot of Bookstorm podcast listeners who love your books. They've been asking for you, but sometimes people don't take the time to really learn a little more about you. And we think it's just fascinating. So Marie is a lawyer for over 10 years. She was a lawyer for two of the largest law firms in the United States and a Fortune 500 company. Wow.
Yeah.
She found her writing calling, and Kristen and I loved this because this is something we believe in at Bookstorm. You are unearthing the hidden historical stories of women. Marie's mission is to excavate from the past the most important, complex, and fascinating women of history, bring them into the light of present day, where we can all perceive the breadth of their contributions and the insights that they bring to modern day issues. And Marie, I loved that little quote because that is the beauty of fiction. There is no fiction that is just not true. It's based on the reality of what we already know to be true. And thank you for that.
Thank you for that beautiful recitation. Wow. I love that. It's funny to hear it, from someone else other than myself.
Requoted, and I can tell that you put a lot of thought into that mission, and it resonated with both of us. So for our listeners, Marie's novels have received many accolades, and I have to name a few because they're very well deserved and well earned. Her novel Carnegie's Maid was a USA Today bestseller. The Only Woman in the Room, New York Times bestseller, Barnes & Noble book club pick. Lady Clementine, an international bestseller. The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, instant New York Times and USA Today bestseller. The Personal Librarian, co-authored, I must say, with Victoria Christopher Murray, was an instant New York Times bestseller, Good Morning America book club pick. And as if this isn't enough, the book we're here to talk to her about today, The Mitford Affair, has rave reviews. Town and Country Magazine, Zibby Owens and Good Morning America, Booklist, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly. Marie's novels have been translated into 29 languages. What a wonderful accomplishment. And we're thrilled she's with us here today to talk about this beautiful book.
Thank you so much. My gosh, I'm blushing with all these accolades.
Well
I don't
earned.
think about them that much, nor do I hear them recited in order like that. So thank you.
There were more. Okay, there were a few more, but we have to we want to hear you talk and get into the story. So we got to leave it at that.
These Mitford ladies are fascinating and awful all at once.
Oh, they sure are. And as we mentioned, we're here to talk about your new book, The Mitford Affair. And Brie, if you are okay with this, I'd like to just give a little bit of a background about the book without any spoilers. That's kind of hard in this case.
Yeah.
Mitford Affair takes place in roughly 7 years before the advent of World War II. And your story follows the lives of three of the Mitford sisters, who are both notorious and also celebrated in some circles, Nancy, Diana, and Unity. And between the world wars, the Mitford sisters, who were real life sisters, really dominated the political, the literary, the social scenes in England. And their family had been through some scandals before, but in your story, the family is facing kind of a big scandal that has erupted. One of the sisters, Diana, divorces her husband to pursue a fascist leader, and then Unity follows her sister's lead. Now, this stirs up rumors about what the women are up to, including that possibly Unity might be Hitler's own mistress.
Yeah.
Your story takes on an incredible perspective that we don't often hear. But what we love is that we start diving into divided loyalties within a family, especially when everything is on the line. Did you want to add anything to our little summary?
Wow. That was a great summary. I mean, absolutely. It dives, you finesse that well without too many spoilers. You do kind of have to set up the way in which two of the sisters really become entranced with some very polarizing, extreme political beliefs. But they're not the only ones. There's another sister who's a sort of I want to say a peripheral player, but she really throws the other activities into bold relief, who becomes a communist. So, you really see the entire panoply of controversy and conflict that's playing out on a large scale on the European continent at the time of the novel, playing out right there among the sisters. And it was that sort of historic conflict that seemed to have so many modern day reverberations for me. And that's one of the reasons I chose the story.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, let's dive right into those. Chris, you want to kick us off?
So, Marie, I have to say for our listeners, we are all lovers of World War II books, and Kristen and I can't get enough of them because there's lessons that must be learned and never forgotten. But you did something very brave, very difficult, but also very important with this Mitford Affair. You showed the reader through the innermost hearts and minds of these sisters in your story how any one of us can become convinced and obsessed with the following of evil. You showed us the story of World War II that we don't often see, the slow fade, I'd like to call it, how slyly Hitler lured and gained followers. In your novel and in real life, what warning would you give to the sisters and maybe even to each of us to ensure that we never succumb to this brainwashing? It made me question, are we really different people today than those women living in World War II?
It's exactly those sorts of the story. In looking at, let me just back up a second. What my mission is, and I have a long list of historic women that I have, women who've left these abundant, constantly growing really legacies, but who are also grappling with very modern issues. And occasionally a particular woman or a particular story will jump off the page and kind of grab my attention because of that modern day resonance, because it speaks to me about it in relationship to something that's going on in the world around me, or because it speaks to me personally. And the Mitford Affair and the story kind of contained at its core, that's exactly what happened. When I was choosing what book to write next, I was looking at the world around me and really trying to make sense of it, to make sense of the way in which all these polarizing and extreme political views, without judging them, how they were coming to be. I was finding it very perplexing, and I was watching friends have these great divisions within families because of these polarizing political beliefs. And I really wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand how people form those beliefs, what to do within a family once that happens. And that I became attracted to this particular story, to a particular story. And I saw within this sort of dark chapter in the Mitford history, I saw something maybe more extreme than what's happening in modern day, but something parallel. I saw these sisters who were pedigreed, well-heeled, they're affluent, they're titled, they have every advantage, and yet they become enraptured with these extreme political perspectives and then espouse them and work towards them. And I thought it was an almost like an invitation for me to take a look at how that happened. And I think for me, as I kind of watched and studied these sisters over time, really from their youth into the time period in question here, I started out with the perspective that people kind of form political beliefs based on an ideology that makes sense to them. But as I was sort of unpacked these sisters' histories, it seemed to me that the sisters, at least, were making political decisions and adhering to political beliefs for very personal reasons. Without giving out too much away, Diana, who's never particularly political when our story opens, falls in love, becomes obsessed with Sir Oswald Mosley, leader of the British Union of Fascists, and then becomes a rabid fascist. It's really the personal that's leading the political. And in Unity's situation, she first is kind of at Diana's side, she's the one who was always political first, always a fascist. Even from a young age, she wants to kind of take it up a notch and become really the first English lady of Nazism, unbelievably, less because of her political beliefs, I felt, and more because of this void kind of within her. She grew up as at least according to Mitford family lore, the least attractive sister, the most peculiar sister, not the brightest of the sisters. And I almost felt like she was looking for a way to have something of her own, to draw attention to herself in her own way. And once again, I saw that the political was very, very personal. And it opened up my eyes to the way in which these political beliefs, not for everybody, but certainly for quite a few, are formed. And I wouldn't say it caused me to have sympathy, certainly not for Diana or Unity, but it helped me understand how people can become sort of attracted to these more extreme beliefs. And to your question of, what advice or what can we extrapolate into modern day from that, is that ask yourself why you believe something. To take away the blinders and say, why is it that I think that this is a worthy political view for me to hold? Why do I feel so attracted to it? To ask yourself those questions and then to really evaluate it without that sort of lens in front of it. So for me, it was a way of understanding what's happening really all around us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kristen and I were discussing this before you came on the show here today. It was very intriguing, and I felt you were giving us a warning, because it's very hard to separate our personal needs and wants from our political views or our search for a political candidate.
Right.
It's almost intertwined, but you showed us with these characters to use extreme caution and to self-reflect. And it was just a great story. Really, it really touched, I think, every reader will see something of themselves that maybe they don't want to see, because we've got to take a look in one or all of these sisters.
Yeah, I mean, they're each sort of caught in this morass in different ways. Our primary three narrators are Diana, Unity, and Nancy, the famous novelist, who's kind of gets wrapped up and then steps away and sees through the lens, sees Mosley and fascism and Hitler really for what they are, and tries to ring the bell, much like her cousin Winston Churchill is trying to ring the bell to all these, Britons in this interwar time period who are all about appeasement and letting all these things unfold around them. And together, they're both sort of waking up and seeing the dangers inherent, not only in following extreme political movements, but in ignoring them, and not taking a stand and not acting when you see a line that's been crossed. And in a way, in that way, in particular, the story is somewhat of a cautionary tale.
Yeah, I'd like to press into that just a little bit more, because I think this is a fascinating subject. Your novel took place during a time when there was great political upheaval, and we obviously have a lot of upheaval now, both culturally and socially and politically in many ways. And we also have something that didn't go on then, and that is social media. And
Yeah.
I was right.
Oh,
And so
right.
I was wondering if you think that young people today are more vulnerable to these ideas, because you have tied what's going on internally to some of the things that they may be vulnerable to or pursuing. And I'm concerned that in the modern day, we have a little more vulnerability because of social media. What do you think about that?
That's a great question. I mean, I look at the way in which, let's take Hitler, for example, in that time, utilized the sisters as propaganda, right? The sisters are exploiting him to a certain extent, but he's certainly exploiting them. They are part and parcel of this larger propaganda effort on his part to woo British people to fascism. Something like, if these beautiful aristocrats who are actually cousins to my naysayer, Winston Churchill, like me and are coming to my rallies, then let's do a whole bunch of photo ops and bring you along for the ride, right? What he's really doing is trying to set the stage should his plans reach fruition and he actually take over Great Britain. He's trying to create a vassal state and have a sort of red carpet rolled out by the fascists, right? Now, I'm not equating everyone on social media today to Hitler or the Nazis, but that sort of propaganda happens the same through a different medium, right? The sisters were at rallies, means of spreading the message at that time, and now we have a much more present, much more constant means of communicating that is directly targeted to specific age groups. So yeah, those same concerns and tactics are used even today in a variety of different ways, and to the most, in many ways, vulnerable populations. Teens in particular, if you're thinking about the youngest who are on social media, they're very susceptible to it, even though they think they're not. They think they're the savviest out there. Certainly my own teens do. But they're really very vulnerable to those messages. And those sort of techniques were used then and are continue to be used today.
Yeah, you had said something that really struck me about taking a step back and asking yourself, why? Why do I believe what I believe? And I'm not sure that we train our young people to do that, to take stock of their beliefs and look what the foundation might be for them. And I almost think that's a skill we need to be maybe,
Right.
teaching in schools and teaching parents to teach to their kids, because, I teach younger people, and sometimes that's something that's of great concern to me. They accept information because they maybe have a belief in the source, but that
Right.
becomes factual. And
That's
we've got to separate sometimes the agenda driven information from factual information.
Yeah, and it's a quandary about how best to go about it. I know it, for example, in my children's school, they do teach them when they're doing research papers about verifiable sources and biased sources, but how well that translates to sort of what's popping up in their feed and how things get in their feed in the first place is a wholly different thing. And depending on the age of the youth, they may or may not be amenable to an adult's perspective on that, because of course they do think they know everything about technology and we know nothing.
Right.
But you're right, it's a real issue, and it's one that I certainly thought about a lot as I was writing this book. I help with my fiction in many ways to posit a question, pose a perspective, and then have people sit back and draw those conclusions and extrapolate from them. Sometimes with that little bit of distance of history, people can see things that are happening around them and to them more plainly they can than if you said it specifically to them. As for my own children, they really don't want to hear about the messages that I'm writing about in my books, but we do talk about all of that stuff. And gosh, you can only just hope that they hear and listen and use that skepticism when they're receiving those kind of messages.
And that's what I loved about the book too. So often we look back in history and we say, well, we would never do that. How could they possibly have done that? Especially in World War II. How did people get brainwashed? Why were they following him? Why were people standing along the sidelines doing nothing? And so by crawling inside these characters, we
Yeah.
see, oh my goodness, that's how. Look how
That's right.
easily they got persuaded. Kind of leads me into my next question. Some of the characters started out on a quest for righteousness and peace. They did not want the war. Their path changed drastically. The reader watched from the sidelines as these women sometimes refused to see the truth.
Yeah.
Even in their personal relationships, they chose to believe the lies they were told, I think because they did not want to accept failure. And I
Mhm.
wondered what you thought. What harm were these characters and each of us in the real world causing ourselves when we refuse to listen to another viewpoint, to correct our current viewpoint, as Kristen just brought up, to self-inflect and take a look at why are we believing what we believe? Do we
Mhm.
have the courage to change it? Can pride become our greatest enemy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly Diana Mitford is the ultimate example of that. She was a woman who literally had everything. She was considered the most beautiful woman of her age. She was married to a fabulously wealthy, handsome, devoted husband. And yet everything had always come very easily to her. And that desire for challenge, she was very bright, manifested in this adoration of Oswald Mosley. Now, query, had she been born in a different age and had different outlets for her intellect, would things have been different? Possibly. But it's almost as if once she went down, committed to that path of Mosley, left her husband, which was a huge scandal for the time. She had two children, two small children. He was married, no intention of leaving his wife for her. He was also kind of a political pariah. He'd worn a whole bunch of different political hats and had kind of settled on fascism because he thought he could garner the most power that way. Once she had kind of thrown her lot in with him, politically and personally, I think she was going to stay the course because of that pride. She wasn't going to listen to anything that Nancy tried to tell her, either straight up or through her novels. Nancy's trying to convince her sisters of the error of their ways through her fiction. And she, in fact, is going to double down because, and I think she can never allow a single self-doubt, because then it becomes a whole cataclysm of self-doubt, right? She's going to second guess her commitment to fascism, to Mosley, to leaving her first husband, what she's done with her children. And then, without giving too much away, second guessing all these other choices that she made in the lead up to World War II that impacted so many people. So I think for her, pride is the ultimate. And I think that's true for so many people today. I think people commit to a path, and rather than have the humility to say, well, I might not have been 100% right. I love this part of the political movement, but not this, but I can't accept it because of this over here. It would require a level of self-introspection and humility that doesn't seem to be in abundance today for any of us, really. Unity, I think, is a slightly different character. I don't know so much of it as pride as, I mean, I hate to sound sympathetic towards Unity, but it's almost, she's so innocent in the most demented way. You know what I mean? Like, she wants to believe in it. She's told herself to believe in it. Her motivations are very different than Diana's. And yet there's a certain part of her that won't surrender her commitment to the path that she's on without giving too much away. And there has to be a certain amount of pride in that. She doesn't want to acknowledge that this path that she's forged to make herself distinct as a Mitford sister is flawed in some very, very awful way.
Mhm. I really did love that character Unity, because we can all relate to her a little bit. You grow up in a family, and what if you're the middle child, or what if you're not the most athletic or the brightest, and especially, I don't have a sister, but I have sister-in-laws and all kinds of nieces and nephews, and I see the competition that goes on in
Yeah.
families. And so there was Unity following a cause just maybe so that she had a voice. And
Right.
then go back to 1940, where women did not have a voice. They had
Right.
to go along with their husband's perspective or choices. And I did not dislike her. I thought there was a little something of all of us even in her.
Yeah, it's interesting because I am actually the oldest of six. Now, we are not the Mitfords, so there's no, but I have
Wow.
seen the way in which sibling relationships and dynamics hone personalities, kind of, highlight certain qualities, suppress others, can do a number on people's self-esteem, can help guide people's or foster people's political beliefs even. And that was one of the things that was fascinating about the Mitfords, is that it's playing out right before your eyes. All those sibling relationships, the way in which different belief systems are formed, the way these sisters feel about themselves and each other. And I think Unity, just as you mentioned, is the one upon whom all of that plays out the most, because she's, I don't want to say the most vulnerable, but she's certainly the most vulnerable in terms of her sense of self. And that is what becomes exploited at first, but to herself, and then later by others. That void that she feels because she perceives herself as lesser than her sisters. And yeah, there's definitely an element, I think, that a lot of people can relate to, especially people who come from large sibling dynamics.
Very well said.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you mentioned a minute ago, and that is this idea of fiction highlighting truths. And, sometimes people aren't willing to see something, but when they read it in another setting, as you pointed out, they may have a little bit more clarity. And I was wondering if you thought that throughout history, has fiction played that role in helping us see injustice or things that just needed to change?
That's such a good question. I mean, obviously, it's what I try to do with my books. I mean, I am mission driven, and I hope that as I bring these women out into the world, people not just look at that particular sliver of the past in a fresh, broader way, but they then take that new perspective and look more broadly at the past and then at our present times as well, whether it's a woman's role in STEM, or the way in which women are involved in these political situations, the responsibilities we have. It goes on and on. But I take a look at the way in which, in this particular situation, Nancy was trying to do the same thing. It's interesting to me to write about a writer and see the way in which her own work was reflecting what she was dealing with, which is something I can absolutely relate to, and the way in which she's trying to use her fiction as a vehicle for change. Now, I don't know that Nancy ever said, "Oh, I was with wigs on the green. I was absolutely trying to change my sisters' minds." But of course, that's what she was trying to do. She had sisters who were being swayed up in fascism. Nancy could see it for what it was. So what does she do when her sisters won't listen to her? She writes a satire of fascism. She puts characters that are so similar to Mosley and her sisters in that book. And of course, I think she hoped that her sister's eyes would be opened, as often happens to us through fiction. But of course, it backfired, and they doubled down, and they just got more wrapped up in the movement. But I do think that in part that was her intention. And I think over time, certainly for me, fiction is a way for us to travel to different times and places, to see the world through different eyes. It allows us to cultivate empathy. It allows us to look at different viewpoints, and really, if we're willing, to examine the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. We at Bookstorm, that's exactly how we think about fiction. It's why we love it. And that was just a beautiful summary.
So readers, you're going to love this book, The Mitford Affair by Marie Benedict. It's very special, as you just heard. If you like World War II, if you're a historical lover, read it. If you're not, if that's not your genre, pick it up and try a historical. This is a great place to start. And Marie, can you give us a little clue? What is on your radar? What might you be working on next?
I actually have a book coming out on June 27th with my co-writer from The Personal Librarian, Victoria Christopher Murray. It's called The First Ladies, and it's the story of the friendship between Eleanor Roosevelt, who we all know, and a woman that a lot of us don't know, but really should. Her name was Mary McLeod Bethune. She was the firstborn in a family, 15th in a family, firstborn free. Beautifully well educated, formed a college in Florida, still there today, Bethune-Cookman. But she was most known during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s as an advocate for equality, one of the best known Black people in America. And in the 1920s, she started to forge a very, very close friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt. It was a time of segregation, so of course it was on the down low. But the reality is, as these women grew closer, their shared causes grew closer, And they started to work on all these endeavors, legislation, appointments, different events. And together they really formed the foundation for the civil rights movement. But really, no one knows about their relationship. And so Victoria and I have delved into the available research material and really teased out such a special friendship, not just in terms of the legacy it's left us, which we are all beholden to today, but also the way in which these two women forged. I mean, they were really each other's BFFs. It's the craziest thing, and no one knew. So it was just really such a gift to write this book with Victoria. We're so close. And I will admit there's like a little autobiographicalness in there about our own conversations and our own friendship. So it was really, really just a joy to write the story.
Well, that sounds really fascinating. And we're going to look forward to that book coming out in June. And in the meantime, book lovers and Bookstorm podcast listeners, you're going to want to connect with Marie Benedict. You can find her on her website. She's on Instagram, Facebook, and you can join her mailing list on her website and pick up this book. And we look forward to the next one. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
So, Kristen, you brought up a really good point. And one of your questions were headed in this direction, but I don't think we touched upon it enough. You were saying, what about the magnetism of a leader in these movements? And I couldn't help but think the personal nature of someone with extreme views like Adolf Hitler. What was it about this person that attracted so many followers?
Yeah, I mean, when you look back in history, you see where many people who were incredibly evil but led people to destruction were also described as magnetic, or there was something about them that drew people in. And I love what Maria was talking about because it almost seems like there is some kind of a complex relationship between a need in somebody individually and that need being met by the attention of somebody with that magnetism.
Mhm.
And you can see it's a recipe for disaster. And, we have all these examples of, Jim Jones in French Guiana or the Branch Davidians in Texas, where these leaders had people believing the most incredibly ridiculous things, and even to the point of sacrificing their families and their lives. But we see that synergy between a need in them and that magnetism of the leader.
Whether it's fitting in or repairing some past hurt or fulfilling some type of weakness. But would that individual be able to self-inflect, to say, oh, there's something wrong with me, I have to stop following this leader? Or are they not even capable in some cases of understanding or comprehending that they're following someone that's really very evil?
I think, when you think about what you are being immersed in and everything around you starts to reaffirm and kind of an echo chamber. This is the right. This is truth. It's very hard to go against that, especially if your family is involved. I mean, think about rebelling against your family values, somebody that you look up to, this leader, and all of the things around you are reaffirming that that's truth. Very hard to step out of that and say, why do I believe what I believe? Well, you believe it because people you trust or that you're drawn to are telling you.
And that's what you said about young people today, the
Yes.
youth today.
Yes.
Why do they believe what they believe? Why do any of us choose a certain political party or religion or whatever we may be following? We do have to check ourselves and make sure that it is our opinion and our thoughts and our choice, and not choices that have been forced upon us by maybe even society. It's a slippery slope that you can get into.
I agree.
I also wanted to talk about this very dangerous slippery slope. When you put your personal needs ahead of the need or good for humanity. And I see this happening inside this book during World War II. People begin to want, okay, you're in World War II Germany and you have needs and you don't have food, and it's been devastation and it's been political havoc, and you just want peace in your society. So you start to say, but I want food, but I want a better house, but I want my husband to have a job. And your needs all of a sudden take precedence over the needs of a whole country or the needs of a whole Europe. It's a scary thing.
You know, there's a show on Netflix right now, I think it's called The Last of Us, and it explores that idea that you can save your family or you can save the world. And just that extreme tension between making those choices and what goes into making those choices. I think we all worry about that at some level, because there's parts of human beings that are selfish, but there's also parts of us that are altruistic and unselfish. Well, what brings that out when a lot of people are about to be harmed, or a few people, or people we care about? I don't know. Those are really tough questions. I think that's why that show is very popular.
We don't even have the answers, but it's really important to look back on history because, as I said to Marie, we think, oh, we would never do that. I would never do something. I could never fall for that. And yet we are the same people that lived in the 1940s. Yes, we may have different technology and different ways of communicating. And now we have social media instead of just the radio. But we still can fall for these things. Yeah. And it is an eye-opening wake-up call, isn't it?
Well, it's different. We have history as a guide. And that's the one thing different from the 1940s. We know what fascism can bring. We know what these ideologies that are harmful can do. And that's why I think we have to learn from history. And if we don't, then that's at our peril.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But they had history in the 1940s. They had BC history.
True.
And still chose to ignore it. This is why I think World War II books are so popular, because it does relate so much to even us today. And there's so much we can glean from it. But I'll tell you, it was just a great book. Marie Benedict, The Mitford Affair, definitely a must read. And I want to give a shout out to our incredibly talented sound engineer. You know him. He's the reason we're here. He's the reason why we sound good and even why we look good. It's the Mr. Mark Carey.
Hope you guys enjoyed the show today, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Mark. Live and in person. Appreciate everything he does for BOOKSTORM Podcast behind the scenes. And guess what? We're going to leave you with a few storm predictions to pique your interest. Maybe you'd like to read ahead. Sometimes you can't because we have the advanced reader's copy, but you're going to be excited to see CJ Box and Stormwatch, Alka Yoshi, the perfumist of Paris, David Baldacci, Simply Lies, Susan Meissner, Only the Beautiful. And we're hoping now to have Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray back with one of their joint novels.
In the meantime, listeners, stay on the radar with BOOKSTORM by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can visit us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. We have TikToks. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our amazing authors, just find us on YouTube. Look for BOOKSTORM and podcast. We should come right up. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep with life-changing fiction.